Imagine a fuel source that doesn't require demolishing, drilling, or mining into the earth to extract the fuel source. Imagine a fuel that doesn't leave behind damaging toxic waste. Imagine a fuel source that slows down and potentially reduces the amount of greenhouse gases emitted into the atmosphere. Finally, imagine a fuel source that we would never run out of and become more economical than the fossil fuels we rely on today. What is this magical fuel source that I speak of? It's algae. Yes, pond scum could save our planet. First, let's take a look at the process of growing algae and turning it into different types of fuel. Then, we will look at the infrastructure that algae fuel will require and the potential jobs that would be created. Finally, we will see the impact of the planet on the planet by switching from fossil fuels to fuels produced from algae. Growing and turning algae into fuel. According to the U.S. Department of Energy, microalgae are very small aquatic organisms that convert sunlight into energy. Some of these algae store energy in the form of natural oils. Under the right conditions, algae can make a lot of oil that can be converted into biofuels. The oil is extracted by breaking down the cell structure of the algae. After the oil is extracted, then it is further processed in an integrated biorefinery, or in the future at a traditional oil refinery. Stacy Feldman writes, some strains can be made into diesel fuel. Aviation fuel and gasoline are processed in two basic ways, in open-air ponds or closed photobioreactor systems. Did you know that there are over 100,000 different strains of algae? Some grow better in different climates or in fresh water, salt water, or even wastewater. Gross. Scientists are currently testing different algae under many different conditions to find the best strains and develop the most efficient farming practices. Now let's talk a little bit about infrastructure and jobs. Much of the infrastructure is already in place. Most of the same equipment used now to refine and transport fossil fuels could be used to refine and transport algae fuel. According to, according to Gwen Dyer, the oil that is produced can be burned as biodiesel or further refined until it is almost the same as the fuel we put into our vehicles today. It needs no special distribution network, works in unmodified engines, and is effectively carbon neutral. And to top that off, the biomass that is left after the oil has been extracted can be fed to cattle or fermented to produce ethanol. Another great idea is to build algae farms next to power plants that use fossil fuels, actually using the CO2 exhaust to feed the algae ponds. The Department of Energy also says that algae grown on a 15,000 square mile area, about the size of Maryland, could theoretically meet the nation's oil needs. Imagine if every state could grow and refine algae into fuel, this would dramatically cut down on transportation costs. On top of that, if we managed to produce enough algae fuel, we could potentially export and the world enough fuel to the world, strengthening our economy. I was unable to find job numbers specifically for algae fuel, but if you go by the U.S. Department of Energy's 2017 U.S. Energy and Employment Report, nearly 1 million Americans are working near or full time in the energy efficiency, solar, wind, and alternative vehicle sectors. This is almost 5 times the current employment in the fossil fuel electric industry, which includes coal, gas, and oil workers. Finally, let's talk a little bit about the impact on the environment. There is no denying that the use of fossil fuels have a negative impact on the environment, from emitting greenhouse gases to toxic waste to the physical damage done by drilling, fracking, and mining. Fossil fuels are also finite and could potentially run out. The Union of Concerned Scientists state that the extraction processes can generate air and water pollution and harm local communities. Transporting fossil fuels from the mine or well can cause air pollution and lead to serious accidents and spills. When the fuels are burned, they emit toxins and global warming emissions. Even the waste products are hazardous to public health and the environment. Next, according to Co op Energy, If we keep burning fossil fuels at our current rate, it is estimated that our fossil fuels will be depleted by 2060. Now, new reserves will probably be found before this point, extending the deadline somewhat, but the clock is still ticking. Or we could turn to something that has the potential of being carbon neutral and completely renewable. Algae yields up to 20 times more energy per acre than leading biofuel crops like corn, according to estimates. Unlike corn ethanol, algal strains can sprout on marginal lands, so they need not gobble up acres used to grow food. Because the slimy organisms suck up CO2, they also have the potential to cut climate altering greenhouse gases. So, after looking at all of the exciting details, why would we not use algae as a fuel source? Algae is relatively easy to grow, can be grown in small areas, and grown in undesirable locations, freeing up desirable land to grow food. We would never run out of algae fuel, and if production of algae increases, fuel prices could drop significantly. So please, I encourage you to run out and shout it from the rooftops that we all need to be using algae fuel and that we need to use it to power our homes and our cars and everything else we use fuel for. Thank you.